In the ancient Mideast, I don't know if there was any disease that was more feared and dreaded than leprosy. The people of the time considered it highly contagious, and perhaps because of their hygiene it was for them. But they were afraid not only because of the disfigurement of the people, it wasn't like that they were off-putting, although that was probably true as well, but they were afraid that they would catch it themselves. And so to be a leper in the ancient Mideast was almost a fate worse than death itself. You see, according to Jewish law, and this sounds harsh, but it was to protect the community, lepers were required to live by themselves, apart from everyone else, in their own community, apart from family and friends. They were strictly forbidden from entering the temple in Jerusalem or any synagogue. They couldn't go to their own homes. They couldn't go to markets. They couldn't go to places of work. And they were required to either ring a bell or yell out "leper" when a non-leprous person approached within any nearness. They were required by law to announce that they had leprosy. In other words, they were forced to live apart from family, waiting out their days, dependent upon the charity of others. If people would sort of bring and leave food near their encampment. Now, with that type of existence, in today's gospel, Jesus heals 10 of these lepers. But why does only one come back to say thanks? When this was truly a life-transforming event for them. Jesus sends them to the priests, which was appropriate because in Judaism, the priest was the one who declared a person unclean or unfit to be part of the community, and therefore the priest was also the one to readmit the person. So if they were cured of leprosy, the priest had to sort of put his stamp of approval on it. But given what Jesus had done for them, you'd sort of think that they all would have just run back to Jesus saying, thank you, God, thank you so much. But they didn't. In the first reading from the second book of Kings, we see Naaman, who was not a Jew at all. He was a pagan with leprosy. And his governor or king sends him to Israel because he hears that there's somebody there that might be able to cure him. And so Naaman goes. Elisha the prophet says, go bathe in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman says, forget that nonsense. We got better rivers than the Jordan where I come from. But finally he does it, and he's cured. And the gratitude, the awe that Naaman shows, he wants to give Elisha everything, and Elisha won't take it. And so finally, Naaman takes 2 mule loads, I'm not sure how much that is, of dirt back to his country, because he says, no longer will I worship any God but your Lord. And so he wanted to be able to do it on the ground of Israel. Now, the one in the gospel who comes back to say thanks to Jesus is a Samaritan. And that is very, very important to the story. You see, Samaritans and Jews hated each other. Just to give you a little background, just to say, because the Samaritans always come across as the bad guys in the Gospels, that's because they didn't write the Gospels. The other side did. But you've heard of King David. You had Saul, David, Solomon. After King Solomon died, the country split into 2. And there became a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And this was around 900 and something BC. And so the northern kingdom had 10 tribes. These were the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. The northern kingdom, called Israel, had 10 kingdoms. Their capital was Samaria. The southern kingdom just had 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, and they were called Judah. Their capital was Jerusalem. And see, all the prophets that wrote were all from the south. That's why the Samaritans didn't fare too well in the writing. Anyway, they hated each other. And Samaria and Jerusalem were only about 35 miles apart from each other. I mean, it's like from here to the airport. They were close, but they were dreaded enemies. Again, in 950 or so BC, the Assyrians came and wiped out the northern kingdom. And then about 100 years later, they came and did the same to the southern kingdom. But the northern kingdom was taken into Assyria, and they started to intermarry with the Assyrians so that their bloodline was no longer pure. They didn't have the temple in Jerusalem to worship in, and so they set up temples in Samaria with a golden calf as a symbol of God. They rejected all the books of the Old Testament except the Law of Moses, the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, because all the other books had been written by the South. So these people, even though they were all technically Jews, they hated each other. And if you have trouble thinking, well, how could people just 35 miles from each other hate each other so much? I would refer you to the Sunni and Shiite Muslims in the Middle East. I would refer you to the Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. And today, in countless countries where one group of people, one nationality, practices virtually genocide, it happens. The Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. And so these 10 lepers are together, the Samaritan forced to live with these other Jews, and the other Jews probably not liking the Samaritan, but their leprosy they had in common. And so they were off by themselves. And while Jesus is making his way down south towards Jerusalem, he's coming through Samaria and the Galilee, and these lepers see Jesus. And they say, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on us, heal us. And Jesus says, go show yourself to the priests. And they go, and on the way, they realize that they're cured. And the one comes back to Jesus to give thanks. That is the Samaritan. And I think that's somewhat important, because why didn't the others come back? And we're not told that. We don't know. But I think the reason it was such a big deal for the Samaritan is this was one of those hated southern Jews that had cured him. He must not have expected much from this guy. I mean, they hated each other. They wouldn't give each other the time of day. And yet Jesus had cured him. And I think his expectations were somewhat low. And so when Jesus cured him, he was just knocked out of the water. He was just amazed that this person would do that for him, an enemy. I think expectations have a lot to do with whether we're grateful for things or not. I mean, if we expect somebody to do something for us, I mean, if you got manners, you say thank you, but, it's sort of expected. I remember when I was in high school, seminary, and college, and even, I think, as a young priest, I had a godmother who would always send me 2 checks a year. She would send me 1 check for my birthday. Of course, this is prehistoric, but it was $5 or $10, I don't know, something like that. And then she would send me one for Christmas, which is, I think, if I remember correctly, $20. Well, every year it was like clockwork, and my mama didn't raise no dummies, so I always wrote back and said thank you because I wanted to keep it coming. But every year I just sort of expected it, you know. And one year, when my godmother had become elderly and infirm, I didn't get a check. And I remember after my birthday thinking, I didn't get my check. My check. See, I sort of expected it. I mean, it was, you know, it always happened. I was thinking, what, did she forget? Did the post office not deliver it? What happened? It's mine. Well, it seems to me that when we have low expectations, our gratitude, I mean, we might say thank you and mean it, but it's not like, wow. For this Samaritan, it was wow. This enemy gave him his life back. I think the Samaritan was absolutely shocked and overawed by what Jesus had done for him. And so we come to today, to us. What has this got to do with us? Well, it seems to me that we can become so accustomed to God giving us gifts. I mean, he's given us everything we have. I mean, he's given us our life, our faith, the standard of living we have compared to 90% of people in the world. He's given us all of this. I mean, you and I didn't say, excuse me, God, but I'd like to be born in the United States. And that didn't happen, okay? So it's gift. And I think we can become so accustomed to everything that God has given us that we might say thanks, but it doesn't exactly knock our socks off. And so today, I'm suggesting that we maybe become more like the Samaritan and look at God and say, wow. Look at God and say, man, it's incredible what you've given me. Not just focusing on what's wrong, you know, our problems or things, because those come too. It's part of life. But simply to sit back and say, wow, you are a good and gracious God. And like he said to the Samaritan, God will say to us, be healed. Your faith has saved you.